Good evening and welcome to the June 15th, 2023 West Country Costa Transit Authority Board meeting. The time is now 6:33. If we can have roll call, please.
Tom Hansen.
Here.
Leon Bailey.
Present.
Maureen Toms. Here. Cameron Sasai.
Here.
Tiffany Crimson.
Sure. Okay, next item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, moving on to agenda item B, which is approval of the agenda.
Move to approve the agenda.
Okay,
Second.
great. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next item on the agenda is C. It's public communications. This time is reserved for members of the public to bring up to the board of directors matters of general interest that are not on the agenda. Do we have any public comments this evening? Okay, so having no public comments, we move on to the consent calendar. And do you want to pull item or do we want to approve the consent calendar?
Move approval of the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Okay, so motion carried 4-0. Next item on the agenda is item 2, and these are items for board's action or discussion. The first one is 2.1, presentation and discussion of the third quarter financial data report from our general manager.
Actually ask Yvonne to give this presentation.
Oh, okay. Okay, we'll take a quick pause to get that.
Yes. Okay. There we are. Okay.
Great.
Good evening. I would like to bring everyone's attention to is the income statement for the third quarter, which is in your packet under this item. And you've probably familiar with this from the second quarter when we went through the Westcat financial second quarter. Third quarter is again in line with our budget. We have on the last column of the income statement is the percentage of the budget remaining. So on the first couple of pages, you're going to see functional classes of our expenses, and each of the 4 functional categories, operations, vehicle maintenance, non-vehicle maintenance, and general admin, are all in line at the end of the third quarter with our budget. There are some individual line items that you may see less than 25% remaining in expenses. In a lot of cases, when we come to a point where at the third quarter, we want to see at least 25% remaining in our expenses, but you might see slightly under, and it could be because at that point in the year, there may have been a one-time expense that hit that book at the third quarter. As an example, the Transbay Terminal, it's a big payment that we make mid-year. And so it brings that particular line item, which is leases and rentals under general admin, up higher in the third quarter, and then it evens out for the rest of the year. So ultimately, we're in really good shape in our expenses, and the bottom line for expenses through the third quarter is a 33.98% of our budget remaining in expenses, and that would be the 9.59 year to date and the 3.1 through the third quarter. So if anyone has any particular questions about the expenses, I'd be happy to answer at this point. If not, I'll just explain briefly the revenues, which is the next on page 5 is where the revenues begin. And again, with the revenues, we want to see the opposite. So we want to see less than 25% remaining to collect. And in most cases, you do see that. In some cases, you actually see considerably more, which I didn't mention to the F&A committee, but as an example, advertising revenues are considerably up this year, and that is above our maximum guarantee that we get. So you'll see a larger amount that we've received through the point in the third quarter. And then RM2, as an example, you've got less. We've collected less because in RM2, we used to do a quarterly reimbursement request. And now we just did the first quarter, and they MPC notified us that we are not required to do a quarterly reimbursement. So we'll do the rest of it at the fourth quarter. So then you'll see that in the remaining in the fourth quarter. I don't really have anything else specifically. I just want to mention that the third quarter income statement, our expenses and revenues is what we do our assumptions on when we do the budget. And so we begin with the third quarter expenses and revenues and draw our assumptions from there. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That item was information only. So the next item on the agenda is 2.2, which is presentation and adoption of the fiscal year 22-23 adjusted operating budget. Proposed fiscal year 23-24 capital and operations budget. Staff report, please.
Thank you. So I'll take this item. So if any of you have looked at our budgets in the past, this is a very different format than we've kind of used in the past. We've tried to expand the amount of information we're providing to the board, not just in terms of giving you more information to kind of see what our financial picture is, but just in terms of increased transparency on kind of what we're doing, and so the board kind of feel comfortable with where we are. So there is a staff report in the budget, which I'm not going to go through in detail, but I will go through some of the individual spreadsheets that we kind of included in the budget and kind of some of the points that I think are worth highlighting, and then to answer any questions. So the operating and capital budget was reviewed by the F&A committee earlier this evening. And the budget packet includes the resolution that ultimately allows us to formally apply for all of the necessary funds through the Metropolitan Transportation Commission for our budget for next year. So the budget as presented includes adjustment to the FY 22-23 operating budget and to reflect the current projections and revenues and expenses, as kind of Yvonne just highlighted through the third quarter. And then the operating and capital budget for FY 23-24, also including a multi-year forecast of revenues and expenses. And as always, staff have taken a pretty conservative approach to forecasting while still trying to present a budget that serves the needs of the Westcat riders. So the budget for the upcoming year proposes $15.3 million in operation expenses. And we also include the revenues to kind of offset these expenses, and an additional $300,000 of proposed capital expenditures in the upcoming year. So say the operating budget of $15.3 million is a 6.7% increase over the FY 23 budget. And that's just reflective of the nature of, cost increases. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those when we get into the actual expenses line items. And then the capital budget is for, say, $300,000, and we've included facility projects, maintenance projects, information technology projects, and all of these are funded through TDA funds. So I'm going to skip forward a couple of pages in the spreadsheets that I included, and I'm going to go to it's listed as page 3, which starts to talk about our operational expenditures. So there's just a few items I would like to highlight here for the board. This document is pretty much the format that we previously presented to the board, and this has kind of been the only document that we've presented in the past. So everything else is kind of new and kind of updated. So the first item at the top is our purchase transportation, which is basically our cost for providing service that MV provide in terms of operations and maintenance. So this is our drivers' wages, all of the costs associated with providing that service. So can see there is a increase year over year, and we have included that number. We're about to enter our final year of our agreement with MV, so we have those fixed costs as part of the contract. But the caveat is that the MV union contract is due for renewal on July 1st. And so they're currently in negotiations. So we need to kind of wait and see how those negotiations are going to come, if that will ultimately require us to come back to the board to perhaps adjust this number. But we've been a little bit conservative in this number, and we're fairly confident that this will be a good number to in terms of operational costs for the upcoming year. So the next item I just want to highlight is a little bit down the page. It's the Clipper and Shopify fees. Right now, we currently pay Clipper 1 fees. So as part of the fare system that we have on board our vehicles, it's partly tied to the number of riders using Clipper, and there's a percentage cost for each transaction that we pay. The reason why we're showing a pretty substantial increase for the proposed FY24 budget is right now there's the Clipper 1 system that is the legacy system that is due to be replaced by the Clipper 2 system. Once the Clipper 2 system hits a certain milestone with MTC and with Cubic, fees will start being applied to operators, even though the system will not be fully functional. And that's expected to happen sometime this year. So there's going to be an overlap of when we're still using the Clipper 1 system. Some of the other agencies have started moving to the Clipper 2 system. Both systems are going to be in place, and the way the revenue funding agreement is with all of the operators, MTC and Cubic, who provide the system, we do anticipate, or we've been told to anticipate, there'll be some double fees for a certain amount of time until Clipper 1 is turned off. So we're kind of anticipating that being in the budget for next year. The next item is towards the bottom of this page 3. It's the tons of fuel and lubricants, and it's in particular the gasoline and diesel line item. And this is basically the cost of providing gas that we need to operate all of our vehicles. This is a line item that we've been we've padded this line item so we have enough capacity because of the volatility of the cost of diesel and gasoline. Right now, we are projecting the current FY23 estimated. We anticipate that to be around 1.5 million. So we anticipate seeing a significant savings from the 2.1 million that's budgeted. But again, just in terms of the conservative nature of how we like to try and do the budget, we are still proposing that same amount for the upcoming year. And this is based on the number of miles that we anticipate operating and a projection of the kind of cost of fuel. And we kind of reach around to the other operators and see where their projections are and kind of figure out a number that seems to make sense for us. So the next item on the expenses category is just on the next page, and it's just worth highlighting under vehicle maintenance, wages and benefits that originally we did have a proposal in the budget, and that line item has been zeroed out for both the current year and the upcoming year. And that's just the nature of the changes in the Westcat staffing levels and how we've kind of moved some of the staffing levels between between information technology, non-vehicle maintenance and maintenance. So those salaries have not gone away. They've kind of just moved into another line item, which is actually towards the bottom of this page. It's under non-vehicle maintenance, wages and benefits. So that's where those salaries have come in. Throughout this year, we've only had one employee who's kind of undertaken all these tasks, but we have contracted out with a separate individual to kind of help out with some of those tasks, who is, as of July 1st, will become an actual Westcat employee. So we're going to take on that additional staff member. And then we're also proposing a utility position as part of the upcoming budget. And this would be someone who just took care of some of the general maintenance around the facility, some of the non-vehicle general maintenance. We have MV utility workers and also work like any bus stop maintenance or picking up garbage at bus stops that we've struggled to do over the last couple of years, since we used to have a contractor who kind of did that for us. And since he retired, we've struggled to fill that position. So that's the intent for going forward, to have someone who's a little bit more out on the streets, kind of looking at what's going on at the bus stops and taking care of any issues as they come up. So I think the other final item, or one of the final items, if we move into the general administration side of it, again, there's salaries. There's you can note that the difference between the approved budget, the estimated budget, and the proposed 2024 budgets. We kind of go up, go down, and then go back up. So last year we did budget for two or three additional staff members who we have not actually brought on board over the year. Hence why the number is lower for the actual estimated. We have just gone through a job classification study with a consultant who's helped us tidy up some of the current staffing job descriptions, and also given us good direction on how we need to move forward in terms of a transit planner and a capital planning manager. So the two positions that we would hope to fill throughout the year, the two pretty much needed positions, because right now they're my three positions. So it would be really helpful to get some additional staff to do some of that work. So that's the goal throughout this year, to kind of find the right people to bring on board. I think the final item on this, again, is just the very bottom item. Our total operating expenses do show a 6.7% increase year on year. So now going to go back up to page 2, which is our revenues. Again, just a few things to highlight on this. I think the first one is we are seeing a very slight increase in ridership. We do anticipate seeing increase in ridership. So we do show an increase in our fare revenue proposed for this year. And it's probably worth noting that our estimated annual, based on our more up-to-date numbers, we're actually anticipating this year to be around $1.1 million in fare revenue. So moving down to just worth highlighting the Measure J line items. Measure J plays a fairly substantial part of our budget, and we're pleased to see that sales tax growth within the county has kind of increased. And so we are seeing, again, year on year increases in all those separate line items that we receive through the Measure J program. A little bit further down is the regional Measure 3 program. Now that has gone through all of the litigation, MTC is actually able to allocate funds. For this current year, I think I mentioned at the last board meeting that we just heard that we were going to receive this $1.145 million in current years for operations, which was a welcome surprise, I would say. And so while we don't have an actual number for next year, I'm fairly confident that based on how allocations occur of regional Measure 3, the amount of express bus service that we operate, and our ridership, that we should see a very similar amount allocated for next year's budget in this line item. Then the other two items to highlight are kind of related. One is the feeder bus funds line item. You may remember we've had a lot of discussion over the last few months about that item and kind of the concerns that we had. We did reach an agreement for a reduction in the upcoming 2024 year with BART. The projections that we would have received if we were receiving full funding for next year is around $3.6 million. The agreement that ourselves, County Connection, Tri-Delta and Labda made with MTC and with BART was to take a 25% reduction this year, given BART's current fiscal concerns. And the plan is to revise that certainly in the next coming months to get a longer term agreement in place as to how this is going to be funded. So that 25% reduction, the amount we're receiving, we're around $1.3 million short of what we would actually anticipate receiving this year. And then if you scroll back up to the line item that is TDA 4.0 prior year. This is TDA funds that we've received in the past that have been surplus in our budgets, and it's basically our reserves. So this is our reserve. So in this current budget, given the current fiscal situation, we are kind of proposing to use $1.4 million of our reserves to get a balanced budget. And as I mentioned to the F&A committee, there's a commitment from staff to bring this item back mid-year when we're a little bit more clear on where the state budget is and how that's going to affect BART. When BART have a little bit more clarity on where their position may be, if everything goes well and the governor signs their budget, they may have a 2-year kind of runway to work a little bit more with their budget. If not, it kind of changes the situation. So, we're trying to keep as much service on the streets as we can right now, while we get a little bit more clarity from other parties on where our funding may be over the next year, 2 years. And, we're asking for this 1 year. We're not expecting us to use reserves ongoing as a long-term kind of solution to our operational services. I mentioned to the F&A committee, if necessary, we will be coming back to the board for discussions on service reductions, on other cost reductions that we can make. So that's just a commitment from staff to come back and kind of keep informing the board on where we are in the upcoming year on this. And the last item on this page is one of the 2 good news items, I think, that in this budget. There's not many, but there's 2. Is the surplus that we are showing for the current year. We do anticipate, given these projections, that we're going to be, having a $2 million surplus on the current year, which will go back to our reserves. Given we already know that there's some additional revenues that we anticipate getting, and the likelihood that the fuel item is going to come well under budget, this line item is probably going to increase fairly significantly to closer to 2.5, perhaps even higher. So it's a pretty healthy number to have coming out of it, towards the end of a budget year, that level of surplus. So moving on to it's page 6. This is one of the other pretty significant changes we've made to the budget and how we're presenting it to the board. This is our capital budget. In the past, the only items that we normally include in our capital budget are vehicle purchases, and then we have this single line item for facility maintenance and facility upgrades. We felt it would be a little bit more transparent to break out some of these into individual categories and recognize that we know that some of these expenses are coming up, and we can start to project when we plan to do some of these projects. We can start projecting where some of the revenues may come from. So this is just an illustrative purpose of where staff right now consider some of these projects may come up. I think that the 2 main ones, or the ones to highlight, are there's the ZEB infrastructure costs that we know are going to come online when we start doing the vehicle purchases. We know when the vehicle purchases are kind of coming up because that's based on useful life and when we replace vehicles. So we were able to put those numbers in, and then just talking internally with staff, thinking about the age of our facility. It's a 32-year-old facility. There's some upgrades needed. We are looking at additional staffing, and we don't have any additional office space. So there's just things that we're kind of starting to think about planning and putting these kind of down on paper so at least the board can see some of these projections. The one capital revenue I think is worth mentioning. These are what we've listed out of the standard ones that we know about. We obviously hope there'll be new additional sources in the coming years, particularly when we get it more involved in the zero emission field. But the RM3 funding for capital projects, we have known for a number of years and had submitted the projects and gone through the process for improvements to the corner lot of land near our facility that we purchased a number of years ago to upgrade that and to make use of it. We also had a project approved through the RM3 process for purchase of additional vehicles, should we find a way to additional operating fund and expand service. But in discussions with CCTA over the last few months, there was actually an additional pot of funding that was allocated to CCTA, which was to be split between ourselves, County Connection and Tri-Delta. And we have recently submitted an application for that for just a little over 6.5 million, or again, just to go towards zero emission vehicles and zero emission equipment. So it was a bonus to find out about that money in the last few months. So, you know, there was a process to apply for it and be approved through the CCTA and MTC, but the money is set aside for Westcat in particular to use those funds. So each of these new individual budget categories, over the next few pages, there's an individual spreadsheet that kind of breaks down each individual category into the projects we're proposing this year. I won't go through all of them, but if you just do go to page 8, is the information technology projects that we are proposing for the upcoming year. And I think towards on the right-hand side, it just breaks out those projects. You know, our card access replacement system is basically our security for the facility. It's an old system. It's no longer properly supported. I think we purchased all of the available spare parts that you could possibly find for that system. So I need to upgrade that system. Second item is an item that the board approved a few months ago, which is our TransTrack automatic passenger count project, which will allow us to kind of really dial down on where people are getting on board our system with individual stops. So that's partly funded through this fiscal year and partly funded through next fiscal year. Also, obviously, we've identified, well, there's always a need to keep on top of network security. So we've identified a project to, upgrade some of our security systems. And then also just the general computer equipment and supplies. You know, there's always a need to upgrade computers on an annual basis. So previously, a number of these items were kind of just included in the operations budget, and so they weren't really called out. And I think in speaking to staff, I think we felt it just gave a little bit more clarity to have these as actual capital projects that everyone can see, the board can see, and we can actually budget a little bit more appropriately. So they're not part of a much larger operational kind of expense. We can actually kind of really dial down and budget these a little bit more clearly. So the next couple of slides start to look at our revenues, our reserves. So again, on page, I guess it's page 11, similar to the capital budget, we have gone through the process of making some assumptions and projections on our potential operating expenses and revenues through 2030. I think this is something that we've done as part of our short-range transit plan in the past, but I think it's going to be really beneficial to keep showing this to the board every year, just to kind of keep people on track of where we kind of think we are. It's the things worth noting as, right at the very top, we list the number of revenue hours that we operate, and that is directly related to the cost of service we put on the street. So if our revenues do not match and the board make a decision to reduce service, that would help reduce operational costs. So that's something that we're kind of just putting this out on the table as to here's where we are. If we carried on operating our current levels of service, the line item that's highlighted, which is the TDA prior year, which is our reserves, you can see that if business as usual, we don't make any changes, we anticipate in 2028 would be when we hit our fiscal cliff. Other operators have different timelines for that, but I think going through the process, that's where Westcat would technically run out of money and be unable to operate the current levels of service. We obviously don't want to get to that point, so we would be making decisions in the next 1 or 2 years based on kind of the projections and where we assume we're going to be. So we wouldn't get to that item. And then the other line item to mention is the BART feeder bus funds. That does show that we're anticipating that going back up to $3.3 million in 2025. That is subject to everything we've previously discussed. There's conversations need to be had with BART on how those funds are going to flow, and are BART going to be fiscally able to contribute those funds to our budget going forward. So that's just it's out there just to, so the board are aware that, that's a number that we're using in our projections, but it's definitely subject to potential change. And then the last page I'm going to talk about is our actual reserves. So this is our reserve balance as of where we are. So the beginning balance for the proposed budget for FY 2024 shows a little over $10 million. That is we have a little over $8 million currently in reserves. And that is then including the $2 million anticipated surplus for this year. So we have a $10 million budget $10 million reserve balance going into the upcoming fiscal year. If you look down where it's the ending TDA reserve at the end of 2024, so this time next year, we would anticipate our reserves to still be around $8.2 million. And then again, we've just gone through the process of projecting out our anticipated costs for operation and capital. And again, you see the fiscal cliff hits in 2028. That's when we functionally run out of money. The other item that we discussed at the F&A committee is that the board has a long established goal of a $2 million reserve balance. And then that was done, we're trying to figure out when, we think around 15 years ago, that was set in place. So it hasn't been looked at for a long time. And then since then, the board did establish 3 additional reserves, which are listed at the bottom, which is the insurance reserve, the facility reserve, and the vehicle reserve. So board have a requirement, a desire for us to have $2,300,000 essentially in reserves. And right now we are estimated to be around $10 million. I think we would like to bring an item to the board in the upcoming months to revisit where the board are comfortable in terms of our reserve balance. And the initial suggestion is that we will come back with instead of a dollar value, we would look at a percentage of operating budget that the board would be comfortable as having and reserves. So that's a discussion that we will come back in the next couple of months to have with the board. But I think going into where we are with the fiscal unknowns, going into where we are with the fiscal certainties in terms of needing to move to zero emission and those costs, and an $8 to $10 million reserve balance is at least a good starting point for us to kind of have some serious discussion with the board on the best way to kind of move forward on that. So that's all I was going to present. The F&A committee did go through this in a little bit more detail earlier this afternoon. So I'll maybe turn it over to the F&A committee or to, for any questions that the board have.
That sounds good. I'm going to just ask a question. Can you describe what the FAA committee is and what it does, just briefly?
Sure. So the F&A committee is the Finance and Administrative Committee. It's a committee that doesn't meet often enough. I'll say that. I mean, it's made up of the current chair, the past chair, and the current vice chair. And the idea is that we will bring items like this to the board just to go through a little bit more detail. Anything that requires a little bit more in-depth discussion, it's kind of just to get some of those questions answered by the individual members of the F&A committee, so they can actually provide a little bit more direction to the full board on items like pretty much always financial items. That's all. I did make a commitment at the start of the year to try and do this more often. It just hasn't always quite worked out. We would like to do it more going forward, certainly.
So thank you very much. And that board is made up obviously of Dr. Collins, Dr. Hanson, and then myself and I rather for this last meeting. So we had that just before this one about 5 o'clock this afternoon. The board recommended the budget the F&A committee recommended that the full board review the budget. That's why we're here now. So are there any things that anybody from the board wants to speak to before we take general questions from the rest of the directors? I think it was pretty succinct, but just okay.
I'll just make a comment regarding the reserve account, where it looks like we're heading over the cliff in fiscal year 2028, and the idea is between now and then we need to, if this is going to be the direction we go, we need to make some structural changes in the coming years so we don't see that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from anybody, any of the directors in the budget?
On the more micro level of things, on the item for printing and translation under marketing and advertising, is the 70% negative percentage change, is that a result of a conscious decision to be a little more fiscally conservative on printing, or maybe a switch to be a little bit more environmentally friendly and switch to more social media, online advertising?
Is this the schedule line item? I'm sorry, I'm just asking. Yeah, so yeah. So I think it's a mix of both. I think we definitely have changed how we print a lot of our media, and we're not doing the fancy booklets at the moment. Currently, we're pretty basic what we're putting out there, and then we are doing, we are trying to do more social media, but definitely trying to print less. So I think it's just a reflection of a decrease in costs of what we're actually seeing.
Thank you. And that's reflected in the 170.3% increase for general promotion advertising. That kind of switch from print to.
Yes, gotcha. And some of that does include kind of driver incentives and some of the things that we're trying to improve around the facility, just in terms of that kind of internal marketing, if you like.
On the same page, the item bus shelter signage maintenance under services, 100% decrease. So I think you talked about this a little bit, and this is due to a vacancy.
So what we used to have a contractor who went out every week to all of our shelters. He retired during the pandemic, and so the line item was zeroed out at that point, really. What we were using, where we were asking our MB, our contractor, to kind of help out when we could, or one of our staff would go out and clean up. But I think going forward, we're looking to fill an actual position. So it wouldn't be contracted work, which was where it would fall in zeroed out. It would actually be a Westcat employee would take on that. So we take it on internally.
Got it. So we're looking to fill the vacancy.
Yes.
Okay. How much in staff time and materials, if you could put a number on it, does it take to maintain one bus shelter?
I think it really depends on the shelter. There's not a huge amount of shelters in the Westcat service area, but there's a fairly significant amount of bus stops that require, even if it's just picking up garbage. And I think that's it. I mean, I can't imagine you need to spend a lot of time at individual stops just on a weekly basis. But we have 236 stops within the service area. So and previously, some of the work does involve if a pole gets knocked down or if there's graffiti. So they're the kind of things that we would be looking to kind of do a little bit better job than we have over the last few years of kind of maintaining and being a presence on the street at some of our stops and shelters.
Thank you for that. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Director Grimsley.
I'd also just like to say thank you for the very holistic and what seems very realistic budget and projection. With regard to the capital projects that are upcoming or ongoing and the hiring goals, can you talk a little bit about the prioritization for those activities?
In terms of the capital, I think the capital projects come up, we're trying to prioritize them. I think at the last meeting, we talked about how we are planning to move towards zero emission. And we have a kind of a plan in place. The board approved at the last meeting. So while they're a priority, we kind of know that they don't need to happen today. So they can be pushed out a couple of years. In terms of the hiring goals, I think there's a definite real need to hire additional staff. I mean, we're a small staff, but we lost 2 senior staff members last year and they haven't been replaced. And so, the 7 current agency staff have taken on a lot of additional work. So I think there's a definite priority to fill those positions as kind of as soon as we can. But it's just in terms of the other capital projects, in the past, it's often been, oh, something's broke, we need to fix it. And I think we're trying to actually go through a little bit more of a process of saying, spending the time. I don't think we're fully there yet, but that's what we did for this year's budget. It's okay. Where do we think we're going to be on all of these things that we know are old and we're going to need to replace? Is it going to be this year or can we make it another year? So they're kind of ongoing discussions at the moment.
Thank you. I appreciate that proactive approach and more of the strategic planning. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned during the presentation, the reduction in BART feeder bus service. And I know there's been lots of communication about this, but for anyone that may be watching, did we negotiate that at all? What caused the reduction?
So, I mean, historically, there's a formula that goes through the MTC process of how much funding ourselves, County Connection, Tri-Delta, and LabDirt receive as BART feeder bus funds. And this all relates back in the 1990s when BART used to provide this. They used to contract out feeder bus service, and they came to a point where in their contract negotiations they couldn't afford to provide it, and so they approached the 4 operators, and so we took on that service back then. And there was an agreement on the number of hours that we would all individually operate. We all have slightly different nuances of how we provide the service and how some of the dial-a-ride and pilot transit services are provided differently. But ultimately, those agreements have been in place since they were updated in the early 2000s, but they've been in place for over 20 years. And BART have always fulfilled their obligations to provide those funds. I think it's always worth mentioning. It's particularly relevant in our service area because there's not a BART station. So all the residents of this service area pay into the BART system, and so this is the extension of BART, if you like. It's the bus transit, it's the bus service that we provide. But during the last couple of years, BART have reached out to ourselves, the other operators and MTC, with a desire to renegotiate some of these agreements that they had. And I think partly when they originally reached out, some of it is just to do really understanding what they're getting for this money that they provide. They've just been writing us a check for 25 years. We're not really following up with data, so I think we acknowledge that as operators that we need to set up something that makes a little bit more sense, that BART can go to their board and justify why they're providing this level of funding and not like $1 million less, or they're looking to justify that. But then once the pandemic kind of played out and BART really started to understand their fiscal concerns, that's when they actually approached the operators and said, we need to do something now immediately and come up with an agreement to reduce these costs on the BART system. So there was a lot of negotiation, there was a lot of conversation, and through that process, actually, the current year and this upcoming fiscal year was an agreement to take a 25% hit across each individual operator. And because of the way our budgeting works and how our funding is, I elected to take the hit fully next year, where some of the other operators split it over a little bit. The decision was a lot to do with, we were having this conversation in April and May of this year, and it's really hard to accept a 25% hit in a funding that you're relying on at that kind of late in the year. So there was an agreement that we would do it on a 1-year basis, and then we would all meet again to come up with a longer term strategy to fund these services. And it's worth noting that, while this is a BART obligation, I think there's also a general feeling that there's a regional obligation to provide these services. They're a vital part of the regional network. So, MTC are aware that there may need to be a regional solution to this. It may not all fall on BART. I think that's where we're kind of trying to figure out how we're going to move forward on kind of what level these funding will be and kind of how they're going to be kind of financed through the regional system.
Okay, thank you. And so we're using a little bit of our reserves to offset that for the next fiscal year, assuming the budget's passed tonight. And then we'll have to look at that for the future just to see how we adjust. But we're not necessarily reducing service immediately. We're going to continue to keep our work with our passengers.
Yeah.
And then we'll have to look at what we can do for Director Tom's to make sure we don't just kind of run the clock down on reserve funds.
Yeah, and I think that's why we commit to come back. If we find out that the BART funds are secure for the next couple of years, that completely changes the question. If not, I think that's when the board need to make some decisions on how we allocate some of our funding. Some of our, we talked about this at the FNA committee, a number of our funding sources are dedicated specifically for express bus service. We can't stop that service and move those money to local service. We can't do that, but there's definitely some leeway of, making sure that we're perhaps only using express bus funds for express service. We're not using other funds that have a little bit more flexibility. So I think they're all decisions the board are potentially going to be asked to make in the next, 6 months, year, 2 years, just as we get a little bit more clarity.
Okay, so it sounds like Express Bus gets funding from maybe one source. BART gets obviously funding from the BART source, and then we also get funding for local. So we can't just reduce local midday and then make that our. Okay, that makes sense.
Well, the local funding is the one that's flexible. So we could reduce local service and increase express service. We just couldn't do the other way around.
Around, understood. Okay. And yes.
Maybe you could, what routes are considered feeder bus BART that they're obligated to do? And BART is, we're running BART's service for them. So it's basically their obligation that we're basically contracted to do.
Yes.
What routes are those?
Well,
Or is it kind of hard to say now?
it is hard to say now, but it's the J routes. We have the JL and the JR that go from Hercules. They operate all along San Pablo Avenue. One goes to Hilltop Mall, one goes to Richmond Parkway, but that's the main core of our service. Since we took on that's ultimately the service that we took on and changed a little bit to suit our needs, but that's what we took on back in 1999. Since then, we have added in the JPX service, which we started in around 2005. We received some RM2 funding for that, but we also probably use some BART feeder bus funds to that. That's the service that, again, starts in Hercules, goes to Pinole downtown, and then gets on the freeway to the BART station. And then we also have the JX, which we just recently introduced, which again receives some RM2 funding, but also is feeder bus service. So there's a little bit of a mix of what we consider feeder bus and how they're funded. They're funded through two different sources in that sense.
So then if it got right down to it, the ones we would really have to keep would be L and the R, because those are their traditionally first feeder.
And they're the two real backbones of our entire service, because they're not just, when I've discussed this with BART, and the BART staff completely understand this, they're not just express bus service. They're not picking up people in Hercules and dropping them off at the BART station. They are picking up people who need to travel along San Pablo Avenue, who need to get to businesses, to doctor's appointments. That's the real backbone of our system, the JL and the JR. I think they're a real important part of what we provide to the community.
Thank you, Dr. Hanson. And I think that it should be important to note that our general manager and others have gone out and really lobbied to make sure that legislators know how important this funding is for small operators. I think we've heard here that we're working with Tri-Delta, which is sort of the Antioch-Pittsburgh area, County Connection, which is sort of the county in the middle, and then also Livermore, LAFCO, to try and do the best we can to link those services together with time slots as well, and then also just to advocate for funding for those services. So we appreciate that. So if there's no other questions, we have a budget before us that's been recommended by the FNA committee that needs a motion. Oh, good. Thank you. Are there any public comments? Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And if there are no public comments, then we'll go ahead and see if we have a motion to approve or adopt the budget.
I'll make a motion to adopt the budget.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so motion carries 5-0. And well done to staff. New format, and it looks great. Next item on the agenda is item 2.3, consideration and adoption of a resolution 2023-06, authorizing the filing of an application with the MTC for allocation of Transportation Development Act, State Transit Assistance Funds, Net Bridge Total Revenues, feeder bus funds, and Regional Measure 2 operating funds for fiscal year 2023-24. If we have a staff report on that.
It's more just this is basically part of the budget process. we need to have an approved budget and we need to have this resolution in place to actually start applying for some of these funds.
Sounds good. And
This
the,
will- mhm.
and the resolution's in the back,
Yes.
for whoever wants to make that motion. It's
It's
on
a,
page 12, well, it's page 2, I think it says, but it's right after the budget.
and it's a standard format. The board will approve this every year. There's nothing changed over many years in this format.
Understood. Remember, make a. Oh, public comment. Thank you. We do that all night. Any public comment on this item? Thank you very much. Thanks. With that, if we have a motion, for
Move approval of resolution 2023-06.
I'll second.
okay, so we have a motion in a second, all in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Well done.
Just to note that we are changing how we're doing the minutes very slightly. And I'm not sure if anyone noticed any difference. I'm not sure there was meant to be much difference, but we are transitioning the staff who are doing the minutes. So if there are any comments as we move forward, we're trying to make them a little bit more streamlined with a little bit, still keeping the discussion intact, but not perhaps not so much detail going forward. So if there are any comments, I'll happily take any feedback on those going forward. The only other real item, well, two other items, I guess we did reinstate the GX on May 22nd. We started operating out of the Hercules hub to the Hercules Transit Centre, then to Del Norte Bar Station. There was no one other than me out of the Hercules hub at 5:45 for that first trip, but we have seen some ridership from that area. You know, it's taken off about how I would have anticipated. You know, we were never expecting ridership to leap on us, but we have had some days where, and it's mainly been Tuesdays and Thursdays where we see the highest ridership, between some days of over 100 riders on those trips that we're making, which is, you know, not fantastic, but it's certainly a start. And we are definitely starting to see the same regular people, but regular people who are either boarding or deboarding at the Hercules hub. So, you know, that stop is being utilised, which is a really good sign. That was a commitment that Westcott had with the city of Hercules to start providing that service a number of years ago, and so we've finally been able to kind of get that service in place. And then the only other item is that we did receive notice today that we actually have filled, or the county have filled, one of our vacant positions on our board for the Rodeo rep. So we'll be reaching out to the person appointed, and hopefully we will see them at the next meeting. And you know, it's no secret who it is. It's Jerry Parsons, who was actually a member of our board a number of years ago. So he's coming back to our board. So it'll be good to see him back on the board. And that's all I have. I was going to talk a little bit about the state budget, but I think we've kind of discussed that as part of the budget, you know, our own budget process.
Thank you. Any questions for the gentleman? Director?
You mentioned the Hercules Transit Center. How's that looking now? Is the parking lot full? Has casual carpool returned at all, or?
You know, Trish may have a better answer to me. I can speak on the number of cars there. I'd say it's probably a quarter full, and
Yeah.
it hasn't really grown. But I don't know. I mean, Chris might have a better answer certainly on the casual carpool. I'm not sure I've really observed if that's still occurring or
Many
not.
years ago when I was traveling, it was like the parking lot with jam. Yeah, so.
Yeah, that was. Yeah.
Mhm.
Hi, Chris Kelly from the City of Hercules. Yeah, I go out and I count cars from time to time, and I generally go Tuesday to Thursday. I was out there today. And I would say for the past couple of months, it's about an average of 51 cars per day, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Now, there are 420 spaces there. It has slowly increased over time. So we're now about, like I said, 150, 151. And I'll continue to take a look just because I'm curious and I have the time to go there. Thanks.
I have a question for council member. Is there a charge for the parking there?
I believe it's $3. And I think they're going, Mr. General Manager, to a new system. BART is.
Maybe I can. Yeah. So
Yeah,
it is,
and I don't know if that charge is going to increase or not. BART has talked about increasing the fares for parking at their main stations, but I don't know if it'll affect the station at all.
It is $3, and the benefit that a rider gets for paying that $3, they actually get a free round trip on our. The idea is they take an one of our express bus, feeder bus routes, and they get a free round trip. Right now, they're given they have to print out a pass. As Councilmember Kelly indicated, they are moving to they're taking it on. Right now, there's a City of Hercules contracts with a outside firm to monitor the parking. They're moving to the BART are taking over the parking, so it will be part of their overall parking system. So they have the app. So that we've still got the agreement in place that we will still provide a free trip, which BART then reimburses us for. But my understanding is that the only time that the fee would increase from that $3 initially is if the parking lot is full or 90% full. So I think we're a ways away from that happening. So I think we're okay with the $3 fee for the time being. But I believe the plan is BART are going to do a soft launch. It was meant to be August 1st. I haven't heard that that's going to change. So there'll be a slight overlap with the current system and with the BART system. And they're going to do some outreach. They're going to put flyers on cars, and they're not going to immediately start ticketing people and, for violations. They're going to roll out that process over a couple of months.
On how they do it, it was before you couldn't do like a daily, you had to do like the whole month. Is that that's new same system where you sign up for like?
No, so you could actually always do it daily, but the problem is you had to print out individual passes each day. There was a monthly option, which is actually going away because it's very underutilized. I think are we still selling one? Yeah, we're still selling one monthly pass, and that's it. So the monthly pass has never come back. And so the way BART work is, it is daily.
There's no way to pay it the lot.
There's no way to pay it, but now it's pay on the app. So
Right.
I think even though there's no way to pay the lot, going to the BART app is a lot more streamlined than the current system, which was not.
It's not, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the gentleman, for the general manager? If not, we'll move to WICTAC representative report.
All right, so we last met with May 26th, and there's a couple other representatives here. So if I get it wrong, please save me. So the big topic was the Richmond Parkway. It's going to be a study to try to make it more convenient for the marginalized communities and reduce impacts for them and improve safety. They talked a lot about how many people are injured and killed on the parkway out walking and biking, mostly to high speed. They're going to try to increase access on the trails and parks and employment opportunity for employment. And it's going to be over a 2-year process for them to get the plan together and try to find funding. So it's more of a study than it is actually to put anything in place. And then they're going to, near the end of it, they're going to go for public engagement. And then the other thing we talked about was a budget, and there's going to be dues increase. And Rob said in the F&A committee report that he's already budgeted for that increase. So we're ready to go on that. So that was pretty much the meat and potatoes of the meeting.
Outstanding report. Thank you. Next item is correspondence. I remember that one. Public comment. I can't remember. So any correspondence? Okay, thank you. And then returning to the agenda, we go to item number 5, which is board communications. Board communications.
One item, Pinole held its first Pride celebration this last Sunday. And I met a gentleman who is a wheelchair user that came here from El Cerrito, and his return back to El Cerrito, he used WestCat, and he had a trying time with accessibility at our stops. And I think that's something that city needs to look at. But he has lots of kudos to the driver who really went out of her way to, talk to him about, accessing the bus in Pinole, downtown Pinole. But she also made a comment of where accessibility issues are challenging. And I would just ask you, the general manager, is if your drivers have that input, can you please pass that information on to us as we're working on doing some improvements to San Pablo Avenue. Having their insight is would be very useful.
Just I believe we actually did receive a comment from that rider, because now you're saying that, I know the two stops in question, we actually talked about it at our weekly staff meeting on Tuesday, so, but I think following up with the city would be helpful, because I think there are areas within both cities, I will say that, accessibility can be a challenge at some of our stop locations, so certainly, yes.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the board? I will, go ahead.
I just want to take the opportunity to apologize to my fellow board members and to the public for my tardiness this evening. I rushed from Berkeley on Thursday evening, so I just want to extend my sincere apology to all. Thank you.
Traffic was, I was here at 5 and traffic is pretty bad coming in at 5. I just want to thank, I know the board had done this. This is probably board before all of us. Well, it's probably here, but the hub stop that goes back, the planning for that. A lot of residents that live in Near Point have asked about it, so I'm glad to hear the numbers are coming up. They may not be where we would like them to be. I know our staff at City Hall is putting it in our newsletter, Hercules Herald, to make sure folks know that it is there and that it's stopping. The stop had kind of been there for about 2 years, I guess, during COVID, but there was no bus, and so people have to get used to that. But I think that's important as we move forward with the hub and continue to gain funding and things to make that long-term project a reality. So thank you, staff, for that. And that's pretty much all that I have. I just want to acknowledge the work there. Great job on the budget. Before you go to adjournment, I have a question. And Rob and I talked about this, but it's several, I think it was a 3 weeks ago. Some board members have asked questions about, when they can suggest new agenda items. I don't know if we have a process for that. I don't want to start one today, but we're gonna have a new chair coming up pretty soon. And maybe that might be something that the chair and the team can work on and kind of report back in the future about how we could, if somebody had a question about new service or do we need service here or some new whiz bang thing they saw somewhere else. I was in Tokyo, so I want to talk about light rail. I'm just kidding. But if we had some ideas, maybe if we could have a process that would be orderly so that the chair and things could move forward with that.
Yeah, we can work on that.
We just offer that in Pinole, we have it as part of our agenda. Well, it used to be before adjournment items for future agenda items, but perhaps it could be kind of blended with board communication.
That's a good idea.
Okay, thank you. And then with that, if there's no other comments or questions, we're at adjournment. So I want to thank everybody for attending. Our next scheduled meeting is July 13th, 2023. That's a Thursday. See everyone then. Thank you. Have a good night. I missed public. Oh, time. I'm sorry. Good. The time now is 7:35. Meeting is adjourned.